Hi, I'm Bobby Lauer, the president of Campus Compact. Thank you for being with us today for this orientation session for the Campus Compact Community Engagement Professional Credentialing Program. We are so glad that you are here. I have had the pleasure of being involved with the credentialing program for over 7 years, having served on the advisory committee since it was created. It has been incredible to see the journey and evolution of this program, and I am so excited about where we are today. Really transitioning the program from not just being a competency model and competency framework, but one that is really about learning and development, which ultimately is at the ethos of who we all are as community engagement professionals. This program is going to offer you a multitude of opportunities to engage in specific areas, as well as looking at getting your entire certification. As I know you already know, this is a community of people that believe in the power of coming together and understanding that knowledge exists and is fostered in so many places within the academy and very importantly within our communities. And this program is grounded in helping all of us ensure that we are keeping our work within the best practice, within what it means to be an authentic and ethical community engagement leader. I encourage you to lean in, to do this for yourselves, to do this for your work, to do this for your students, communities, and institutions. This program is very much created to help us all be better and in community with one another. Thank you so much, and I look forward to working with you throughout your journey.
Hello, and welcome to the Community Engagement Professional Credentials Program. I'm Emily Fopp, Senior Manager of Professional Development for Campus Compact, and I'll be your primary contact for the CEP Credentials. Campus Compact is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to higher education, civic, and community engagement. Through campus-based membership, we engage faculty, staff, institutional leaders, and students in our national coalition of colleges and universities. The CEP Credential Program is one of many Campus Compact offerings spanning professional development, student engagement, national service, affinity networks, recognition opportunities, and much more. I'm so glad you found your way here. The purpose of this webinar is to orient you to the CEP Credential Program, whether you're just here to learn more or if you've already registered to participate in an upcoming cohort. Let's get started.
Why a CEP Credential Program? CEPs, or Community Engagement Professionals, are professional staff whose primary job is to support and administer community campus engagement in higher ed. This term was created to define staff who support community engagement but are not primarily research or teaching focused. This term allows our field to center community engagement practitioners that are often left out in a research-focused world and makes room for those of us who identify as practitioner scholars. CEPs span a wide range of settings in higher education, including administration, service learning centers, study abroad offices, think tanks, centers for community engagement, extension services, disciplinary departments, and more. They are often staff, but they can also be teaching faculty, graduate students, postdocs, and community partners. Despite institutional differences, CEPs have a number of commonalities, establishing them as an important group to be recognized apart from others. 1. Shared professional identity. 2. Shared ethical commitment. 3. Shared knowledge passed down from field pioneers or the previous generation in roles. 4. Shared body of knowledge and practice. 5. Shared ways of working, led by ethical commitments. While there are shared commonalities that support recognizing CEPs as a profession, the fact that CEPs come from so many different disciplines, backgrounds, etc., means that part of orienting oneself to the profession is also coming to make sense of one's own orientations and pathways to this professional community. With that understanding, this program is designed for future and current CEPs in all phases of their career. This includes graduate students and recent graduates looking to enter the field, early career CEPs, experienced CEPs looking for continued education, and faculty who also hold community engagement administrative roles. There are several goals for the CEP Credential Program, which are to support CEPs to build their capacities in the following areas. 1. exposure to best practices in the field as viewed in higher education. 2, operationalize ethical community engagement. 3, bring back a focus on the public good and social justice in higher education. 4, facilitate ethical student civic learning and development. 5, promote equity and inclusion in the larger university community. 6, cultivate high-quality community partnerships. 7, leading change in higher education. And 8, promote ethical research with communities for public good. If this is sounding like the right fit for you or your team, I encourage you to continue along as we dive a little deeper into your individual goals for program participation and the pathways available to get you there. The objectives of this orientation include participants will be able to describe in their own words the CEP Credential program's goals, the program's structures, including core concepts that define the credential, the content courses available and their respective goals, key contacts and how to access resources. Participants will discern connections among their goals for credentialing and their capacities and understanding of themselves as professionals and leaders.
I'd like to now introduce you to my colleagues Mary Price and Maya Malik, Campus Compact Fellows who collaborated in the development of the credential courses. Mary has worked to help me update the CEP Credential program, serving as a strategy fellow. Mary is an anthropologist with 20-plus years of experience working in roles at the intersection of campus and community, particularly in areas related to faculty professional development, community-engaged learning course design and assessment, and campus community partnerships. Between 2009 and 2022, she led faculty development efforts at the IUPUI, now IUI, Center for Service and Learning. Most recently, she worked at the Forum on Education Abroad, the standards development organization for the field of education abroad, as the Director of Teaching and Learning. She continues to be an active contributor to research, scholarship, and practice related to service learning and community engagement in global contexts and to advocacy for publicly engaged scholars. Maya Malik has a background in social work, participatory action research, and community organizing. They are an arts-based researcher that co-creates interventions with marginalized communities. At the time of their fellowship with Campus Compact, Maya served as the Assistant Director of Curricular Initiatives at Brown University's Swearer Center for Public Service. They previously served as a 2023-2024 Participatory Action Fellow with the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, UUSC. Maya will orient you to the program structure and CEP competency areas, followed by Mary, who will walk you through an activity that helps you explore your identity as a CEP and begin to chart your individual goals that you might have for the program. Along the way, there will be opportunities to pause the recording for reflection activities, and you can come back and restart anytime. Thanks again for taking this first step in the program with us. We're happy you're here.
Hi everyone, Maya here. So, what is the Community Engaged Professionals Credentialing Program, you might ask? The credentialing program provides an opportunity for CEPs at any career stage to grow as professionals and certifies that they have a base knowledge of best practices in the field and beyond. If you need a refresher on the goals, go back to Emily's section where she outlines the objectives. I'm here to tell you a little bit more about the program structure and what you can expect in each course. The program is currently structured around 5 competency areas organized as asynchronous courses. Each course corresponds to a professional competency or critical commitment outlined in recent scholarship to guide the field of community engagement in higher education. The initial courses included are Community Engagement Fundamentals, Community Engaged Partnerships, Equity and Inclusion, Community Engaged Teaching and Learning, Community Engaged Research. As the program grows and needs evolve, we will add additional courses to cover all the competency areas and fit the changing landscape of the field. We will provide a high-level overview of each of these courses later in the orientation, but first, let's discuss the types of credentials available and how you can navigate the program to the best meet your own needs and priorities. Behind me, you will see an infographic that shows the flow of the program. The first step is registration. The next step, which you're completing right now, is orientation. Orientation is a short webinar that gives you an overview of all the courses and will inform you of how to navigate the open structure. The credentialing program is structured so that you can complete any of these asynchronous courses individually and earn a digital badge, aka a course credential. You can take as many as you like without seeking the full CEP certification. There is no predetermined sequence of courses. You can take them in any order based on your own interests and needs. However, we do recommend starting with fundamentals if you are newer to the field. You are not required to get a full certification or complete all courses. You can take them or leave them as it fits your interests. There is no cutoff time or requirement when taking individual classes. The only time-based requirement is for those who are interested in the full certification. There are two ways to complete the program. The first option is to receive individual credentials for each of the courses mentioned above. For this option, you are not required to take all of the courses. You can stop at one or take them all. To complete this option, first you will look at the orientation to get the necessary background, then you will complete the course. To do so, you will be required to attend Zoom cohort meetings or check-ins, complete all virtual modules for each course you choose to take, and pass a final assessment. Once you are finished with that, you will receive a digital badge for the course completed. Option 2 is to become fully certified or fully credentialed. In order to do this, you must complete at least 5 courses and a digital portfolio. Option 2 requires that you do all the steps in option 1. Once you receive your digital badge for each course, you will then be able to move on to creating your capstone portfolio. Now I want to get into a little bit more information about the individual courses and their anatomy. All of the courses are asynchronous learning. Because when we talk to CEPs in the field, they said that flexibility is really important to them. We also have 3 synchronous virtual cohort meetings that you can utilize for networking. We also have a discussion board that you can utilize to connect with your cohort members between meetings. There are built-in knowledge checks throughout each course, and all courses follow the same structure for ease. Now I'm going to go through and give a little bit of information about the competencies for each course. The first course I'm going to outline is the Fundamentals of Community Engagement course. Even though there is no sequencing, we do recommend you take this course first if you are newer to the field and need some background. The Fundamentals of the Community Engagement course promises that participants will leave being able to demonstrate an ability to effectively and elaborately summarize the foundations of the field and the breadth of community-engaged work. Another course that we offer is Community-Engaged Partnerships. The goal of community-engaged partnerships is that participants will leave being able to demonstrate an ability to effectively cultivate, facilitate, and maintain high-quality partnerships with community organizations and representatives. Another course offered is Equity and Inclusion. In this course, participants will leave being able to demonstrate an ability to practice and promote diversity, equity, anti-racism, and inclusion in one's engagement work. Another course that is offered is Community-Engaged Teaching and Learning. Participants will leave being able to demonstrate an ability to effectively facilitate curricular community-engaged learning experiences that are beneficial to students and the community. Community-engaged research. In this course, participants will leave being able to demonstrate the knowledge, skills, and critical commitments that must be mobilized by CEPs who engage in ethical and reciprocal research with communities. One recommendation we have for everyone participating in either option 1 or option 2 or any of our courses is to keep a record of your work. We want all participants to keep a record of the work they completed. You can do this by setting up a local folder to save assignments so that you can share them later. This can help you demonstrate that you fully participated in the certificate, and you could also use these materials for a professional portfolio later on. If you need more information on how to keep a record of your work, please contact Campus Compact or Emily at this email.
Hi, Mary here. In this section of orientation, we transition from an introduction to the CEP Credentialing program to a reflective activity where you can examine your relationship to being a community engagement professional. For those of you about to begin your first credential course, this activity is preparation for your first cohort meeting that will be held during the first week of class. For those of you considering whether to enroll in a course, this activity may be helpful in deciding whether the CEP credentialing program aligns with your current priorities. Let's get started. Embracing a profession isn't just a process of building knowledge and skills. It's an ongoing process of sense-making and wayfinding. CEP roles are patterned and yet widely diverse. You can find us in a range of offices across campuses beyond community engagement centers, including student affairs, study abroad, career services, or other experiential learning offices, as well as sustainability, social innovation think tanks, academic programs and departments, or outreach and extension offices, among others. Some of us come to this work directly post-graduation, after being engaged in our communities as students, while others arrive bringing prior experiences as educators, volunteers, community organizers, artists, working professionals and entrepreneurs, and researchers. Given the diversity of locations that CEPs can occupy within higher education institutions, variations in the focus of our boundary-spanning roles, and the myriad ways that CEPs may be called to this profession, it can be challenging for many of us to make sense of and navigate our careers. To answer questions like, what is our profession? And what does it mean to each of us to be part of a community of community engagement professionals in higher education? What professional identity do we want to claim through our work in service learning and community engagement? What might each of us say our engagement philosophy is? What does a professional growth pathway as a CEP look like for each of us, given our values, roles, context, priorities, and aspirations? Or put another way, what does it mean to grasp a full sense of oneself, as Anne Colby and William Sullivan note? To be claimed by a craft and a public purpose in whose service one can use that craft. The craft here being service learning and community engagement. Learning about the history and practices of SLCE from a broader field-based perspective and developing your own answers to some of these questions is part of coming to find oneself within the craft. The CEP Credentialing program is an opportunity for you to expand your knowledge of the profession and its practices, as well as to examine some of these deeper questions, both as an individual and as part of a professional community. In service to this end, I'm going to walk you through a multi-part mapping activity that I've used with engaged faculty and staff, as well as graduate students in my professional development and coaching work. It's called Scholarly Professional Identity Mapping, which I refer to as SIM. The version presented here is in an adapted form from the original. If you're interested in seeing a print version of SIM used in professional development and coaching programs involving engaged faculty, please check out the references at the end of this presentation. So what is scholarly professional identity mapping? Simply stated, SIM is a multi-part reflection activity. It's designed to assist academic and community engagement professionals, both current and future, in their sense-making and wayfinding work as boundary spanners. SIM provides a means for you to describe and examine relationships among frames of reference that inform your professional self in SLCE using concept mapping. It's also an opportunity to use insights gleaned to claim agency in pursuing goals that align with your values and public purposes. Completing SIM yields two types of products, notes and reflections, and a graphic representation or map. You'll want to save your notes and reflections as they will come in handy when you come to draft your map. I encourage you to work at your own pace, There'll be points throughout the activity that I'll prompt you to pause the recording, but feel free to stop at any point that you need to. One thing that I want you to keep in mind is not to worry about this producing a perfect map. Right now, you're producing a draft, not the final product. It's okay to jot notes, post questions, doodle, even leave question marks around some items. There aren't a lot of materials needed to complete CIM, but you do have options. One approach is to complete it by hand using pen and paper. A second approach is to complete CIM using a common word processing or presentation software like MS Word, PowerPoint, or Google Docs. If this is your preferred approach, I've created a PowerPoint template that's downloadable on the Campus Compact CEP Credentialing Program homepage that you can access. A third way is to work in your favorite whiteboarding software such as Miro, Padlet, or LucidPark. The important takeaway here is use whatever approach works best for you, your learning style, and ultimately your goals in doing this activity. There are 5 parts to this activity that culminate with drafting your scholarly professional identity map. Step 1 is identifying what's your why. Step 2, what's in a name, and particularly naming the values and principles that guide your work in SLCE. Step 3, we're going to keep on the theme of what's in a name, but this time finding words that describe who you are. What is your CEP identity? Step 4, getting clear on your purposes by helping you to identify ways to distinguish your public from your private purposes in being part of SLCE. And finally, step 5, putting it all together by drafting your map. Once you've created the first draft of your map, I'll provide some additional guidance on ways you can use it in your professional growth journey. This activity is intended to be iterative, and so there is a 6th step to CIM, which is reflecting on the various dimensions and patterns you observe on your map and using them to fuel further introspection and inquiry. For this reason, I encourage you to save your notes and your CIM map in a readily accessible location for future reference. For those of you that have already enrolled in a credential course, you'll have opportunities to further examine your map and share your reflections during your initial cohort meeting at the beginning of the course. Campus Compact staff will send out additional instructions as those meetings approach. A few guideposts before you get started. You're going to want to stop the recording to complete each step, and we encourage you to work at your own pace. Remember, you're producing a draft, not a final product. And it's okay to jot notes, post questions, even leave question marks from some items. And remember, there's no right answer. There's just your answer at this point in time. Your CIM map, like your own sense of self, evolves over time. This is just an opportunity to ground you in the now and chart ahead of where you want to go. Now let's begin. This activity is called What's Your Why? In it, you'll examine the professional and personal pathways that brought you to service learning and community engagement. Many individuals working as CEPs didn't begin their journeys with the intent to be a CEP. Nonetheless, many of us find a calling to this work, but may not have stopped to reflect on the what's and whys that drew each of us to it. The framework you see on the screen is one that articulates some common pathways that draw individuals into SLCE. We'll refer to it as the SLCE Pathways Framework. Each of the pathways reflects sources of motivation or calling to this area of work in higher education. Before we consider our own, let's briefly review each of the pathways. Vocational pathways are marked in orange. These include the mission, community, ways of knowing, and pedagogy pathways. In the mission pathway, one of your whys is about fulfilling the purposes of your institution. This often takes shape through the institutional mission. So think the land grant mission, the HBCU mission. In the community pathway, one of your whys or callings is about contributing to community change and the value and meaning that that provides to you. In the ways of knowing or epistemology pathway, your why is rooted in a calling to create and share knowledge, while the pedagogy pathway represents a calling to contribute through educating current and future generations. Personal pathways are marked in black and include categories of identity, legacy, professional, and innovation. If you're drawn to SLCE through the identity pathway, one of your whys derives from seeing SLCE as an extension of enacting one's faith, personal, or cultural values and ways of being. Relatedly, you may be drawn by the legacy pathway, where one of your whys is it about carrying forward family responsibilities, such as a legacy of public service, whether through professional tracks or volunteerism, or through maintaining family traditions. If one of your whys is about cultivating career-related networks where you can find other like-minded colleagues that are drawn to the values and goals of SLCE, then the professional pathway may be salient for you. Alternatively, perhaps your sense of fulfillment and motivations for being engaged in SLCE is due to you seeing this work as a space to be part of emergent and generative processes that can lead to social and community change. If so, then the innovation pathway may be a source of one of your whys. The third category, institutional priorities and commitments, are pathways linked with your institution's priorities and values. These are marked in white on the screen. The topics and themes in these categories can be fluid as higher education institutions respond to internal and external conditions, forces, and reassess their priorities and relationships on an ongoing basis. We may find ourselves not only drawn to particular types of institutions and offices, but also to specific threads of work in these institutions. Hence, which priorities and commitments we are drawn to can influence our sense of fit, agency, and efficacy within our institutions, offices, and fields, and are also entangled with our respective pathways rooted in vocation and/or personal factors. For illustration, I've listed a few of these priorities and commitments that are frequently linked with SLCE. Some of these include recruitment and retention of both students, faculty, and staff, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, transdisciplinarity, and internationalization. These are not the only ones. So if one that is central at your institution is missing, for instance, such as sustainability or workforce development, please take note and adjust accordingly. All right, now it's your turn. Now's a good time to pause the recording and take a few minutes to consider which, if any, of the pathways reflect your experience. List the pathways that apply to you in your current position. If you're in a more advanced point in your career, you might also consider the extent to which your pathways have evolved over different points in the course of your professional life. After you've compiled your list, take a few minutes to examine and expand upon it. For example, what patterns do you note within your pathways? Are your pathways singular or multiple? Are they tied more to institutional priorities that inform your scope of work, or are they more deeply rooted in your personal history and values that you hold? Some combination of both. If you were asked to write a paragraph that conveyed the gist of how you've come to this work, what would it look like? Take a few minutes to actually write out a couple of paragraphs that might be your own civic engagement or community engagement kind of biography. How did you come to this work? Take a few minutes and then come back and join me. Now that you've spent some time examining your own journey into service learning and community engagement, let's continue with the pre-mapping work. We've all heard that words matter and that there is power in being able to claim a name. The next two steps in SIM invite you to identify your guiding values and the nouns and modifiers you might use to introduce yourself to others professionally on campus, in the classroom, or in the community. What words reflect what is distinctively you as a community engagement and academic professional? What words would you use to bring you and your work to life for those not familiar with it? How might you convey a sense of the ethos or soul that informs your way of being and doing in this work? Let's begin with values. The list you see on the screen provides an illustrative list of professional and moral values. The list is illustrative and intended as a springboard to spur your thinking. Take a few minutes to pause the recording and read through the list. Are there any that express your core values? If so, take note of that. If not, what would you add to the list? Jot those down. Now that you've read through the list, jot down 3 to 5 values that are integral to who you are as a professional and human being. For some of you, listing values may be insufficient. You may prefer to to not speak of values, but of principles. Either approach works. What matters here is not creating a laundry list. That is, your charge is not to list all of the values and principles that matter to you, but rather the ones that cut across your efforts, the ones that are your non-negotiables. So challenge yourself to list only those values that you think most inform how you show up in the ends toward which you work. Go ahead and pause the recording to jot down your values. As you do, I encourage you to jot down some additional notes about the values and principles you have listed. In your own words, what do each of these values mean to you? Draft your own working definition. Consider what makes these values particularly foundational to you and in what ways they are central to who you are as a CEP. Think back to your responses to the pathways question. If you are a CEP and a faculty member, you might also ask how these values are part of your scholarly identity. Welcome back. How did it go? Did you find it relatively easy or challenging to define and narrow down your list? Listed on the screen are some core values for other CEPs that have used this mapping tool. Unless otherwise noted, the examples I share here use pseudonyms. I will say for myself, I found it really challenging to narrow down my list to 3 or 4 values. I could always see connections to so many of them. One reason I struggled was in my role as a CEP, I was very focused on resourcing and supporting others to advance their own engaged work, not necessarily my own. In such situations, how do the larger values of the field translate into my role and worldview, or into yours? I say this because you may be tempted to list a value because it's a stated guiding value for the field. However, such values, while important, may not necessarily stand as one of your core values. This isn't to say you don't find meaning in them or that they aren't important to you. They just may not be your primary or your non-negotiables. Rather, they may be secondary values or reflect a desired outcome that you hope to encourage through your work. Now let's move on to the question of naming practices. Names can be bestowed as well as claimed. Giving and choosing a name are in fact expressions of power and agency. In choosing a name, we claim ownership of our story, connecting ourselves to a community, a shared history. Alternatively, we can also challenge the status quo and reframe how others might see us and the nature of our work. To be clear, the names I'm thinking about here are not about your job title, role, or a task assignment. I'm referring to names that reflect your view of your professional identity. Here are a few examples to illustrate. Silas is an American Studies and Public Policy graduate student and a CEP that describes himself as a transformational leader. He values collaboration, trustworthiness, accuracy, and fairness. While Pam, a visual communications faculty member, identifies as a community engaged practitioner scholar, working with people to find the designers in themselves to improve their lives. You'll note that Pamela elected to describe her values as principle statements. That all people have the ability to design, designing with people, not for people, and that people are experts of their own experience. Finally, Felicia, whose work focuses on co-curricular student civic leadership programs, described herself as a student-centered change leader. And her values are justice, humility, interdependency, and action. Now it's your turn. On the screen is a list of descriptors. As with the list of values before, the list of names here is illustrative. You might find others that you find more salient, so don't feel limited to what you see on the screen. If you could give yourself a name, what are 2 or 4 words you would use to describe your professional identity? You can pause the recording here to work or move on to the next slide to see some examples and pause there. For reference, on the screen are some examples of responses that I've received in the past to this question. If you haven't paused the recording yet, go ahead and do so now to claim your descriptors. When done, hit the play button to restart the recording. Great. How'd you do? When you read through your descriptors, do they sound pretty generic? Or are they a solid encapsulation of who you are in this work? The task of naming is often more challenging given that our work is by nature boundary spanning. I encourage you to try out your descriptors in conversation with others and ask for feedback. They may evolve over time. For now, let's go ahead and move on to the next step in the activity, mapping your public and private purposes. Let's continue with part 4. In service learning and community engagement, we often talk about universities contributing to the public good and the importance of engaging students in examining their public purposes. In examining our identities as academic and community engagement professionals, it's helpful to pause and consider our own, and to distinguish between those we might label as private and those we might categorize as public. First, let's consider private purposes. By private purposes, I'm referring to goals, interests, or motivations you have for being publicly engaged that bring you personal gratification or otherwise directly benefit you. That is, some of the reasons we do our work serve our own private interest. Some examples of private purposes include getting paid to do the work I love, sharing my love of learning with others, making new discoveries, living out a life of the mind, honoring my family's legacy. By contrast, other ends that guide our work may be better construed as public purposes. When I speak of public purposes, I mean those that contribute to or result in public goods. If you're curious about what constitutes a public good, one way of thinking about them comes from political scientist and civic educator Harry Boyd, who defines public goods as things material or symbolic that have lasting civic value created by a self-organized mix of people who work together to solve common problems. So some illustrative examples of public purposes might be improving access to clean water, working to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline, ensuring all members of society have equitable access to high-quality health care, or ensuring all students have opportunities to learn and strengthen their civic skills in K through 16. In this step, I'd like you to identify what you see as these essential public purposes of your work, taking stock of your role, your values, your lived experience, and your talents. I've posted a couple of examples on the screen to illustrate. Pam, for example, enables people to communicate their experience, frame root and core problems, and create meaningful impact in their lives. Mine is make the campus safe for public and engaged scholar practitioners to thrive in their work with communities, while Dan's is to inspire students to see their role as valuable contributors to the public good. Now it's your turn. Go ahead and pull out your working notes and pause the recording. Come back when you're ready. Now that you've drafted your public purpose statement, it's time to review and revise it to check it for fit. Is your statement specific enough, or is it still pretty general? For this exercise, I'd like you to try to be more specific, really emphasizing the context of your work. Focus on core purposes. Take a look at your statement and review the number of public purposes you have listed. If your draft consists of a long list of public purposes, for example, 4 or more, You likely haven't gotten to your core statement just quite yet. Remember, there are many ways we contribute to public purposes as CEPs, often in support roles to others. However, that isn't the same as what the intersecting threads and themes are for our own statements. Look for a cross-cutting or central theme that features you as a central character. I also encourage you to test out your statement by doing one or more of the following. 1, you can read it out loud to yourself or to a colleague, friend, or loved one. If that person were to read your statement and your name wasn't listed, would they say that the statement fits you like a glove? Or might they say it could be a statement written by any of a number of other colleagues they know? Another way to gather feedback is to conduct a thought experiment by imagining that you are creating a statement for someone not familiar with you or your work. This could be in the context of a student affairs colleague, provost or dean, faculty members, a community leader, K-12 students. All right, enough tips for now. Go ahead and pause the recording and take a pass at revising your statement. Take a few minutes to look back at your notes, particularly your core values commitments, the way you would describe yourself as a CEP, those descriptors and identifiers, your public purposes statements, and then I'd like you to try to identify 1 to 3 examples that illustrate how, as a community engagement professional, you work to bring to life the changes you want to see in the world, or your little piece of it, your campus, your office, the neighborhoods you work in. How do you express your core values through the work you do toward advancing the public purposes that you've identified? It may be that you take an alternative stance and it's not necessarily about your own, but maybe you also try to triangulate that with advancing the public purposes of your office, your institution, or oriented to your field or profession. You pick the lens. Go ahead and pause the recording here and jot down your thoughts. When you're done, you can proceed to the next slide where I share a couple of illustrative examples that you can review. On the screen, you'll see that I've provided 2 examples, one from Silas and the other from Pam. Silas saw his public purposes through the lens of being an educator and community member, as he had returned to graduate school after working in K-12 schools. His public purposes centered on fostering safe learning communities, promoting equity, and supporting disadvantaged populations. In responding to how he advanced public purposes, Silas chose to focus on a couple of very specific examples. One of those is illustrated on the screen. Pam took a different approach to addressing the how question. In her case, she outlined the standpoint she held and ways she framed her work, and then went on to identify specific methods she used. Welcome back. You've made it to the last step, and that is organizing the work you've completed in steps 1 through 4 into the first draft of your identity map. Let's describe the components of your map. Your map should include, number 1, your descriptors and identifying labels. Number 2, they should also include a listing of all of the values that you've identified, those core values from our earlier exercise. Number 3, you should also list out what your final list, or at least your final list for the moment, of your public purpose statements. And then part 4 is, 1 to 3 examples of how you enact or advance your public purposes. First, you'll need to decide on a point of view you want to organize your map around. You can choose to create your map based on a role-focused or domain-focused view. Roles might be things like practitioner, leader, advocate, researcher, scholar. Domains might include things like teaching, research, service, mentoring, leadership. Organizing your map based upon role or domain provides another way for you to think about the integrative nature of your work as a community engagement professional, and an opportunity to identify areas for growth. However, don't get too hung up on the labels you see on the screen. These are just illustrative. Feel free to adjust them to fit you. Ditto for how you render the circles on the Venn diagram. To illustrate, I've shared a couple of examples on the next slides. In our first example, we meet Shelby, a university staff member whose job title is Director of Faculty and Community Resources. You can see she elected to take a role-based approach to building her map. And this, by the way, was her first iteration. The roles she claimed a strong affinity for as part of her identity as a practitioner scholar include developer, supervisor, mentor, and administrator. Take note that Shelby decided to outline her circles with dotted lines rather than solid lines as you saw in the template to indicate her view that these roles are mutually reinforcing. Her work as supervisor and mentor shapes and influences how she works as an administrator and vice versa. And we could look across all of the affinity roles that she articulated to argue the same thing. Similarly, the size of the circles and the degree of overlap are not accidental. Rather, Shelby chose to resize each to reflect the degree of emphasis she places on these roles in her current position. Alternatively, she could have chosen to draft these from the perspective of her future self. That is the ideal she is seeking, and the size and relationships between these circles might look very, very different. The second example is part of my very own identity map that I drafted while I was Director of Faculty Development at an academic civic engagement center. As I had mentioned, my role had evolved over time, and I'd come to see myself as a coach, advocate, scholar, organizer. And so I chose a domain-based view of my map as I wanted to clarify the ways in which my work actually expressed or could be represented as faculty work. I, like Shelby, use dotted lines, which you can see here, to convey a sense of boundary spanning and the fluidity in how I saw points of integration across areas of my work. However, as a faculty member, so much of my effort and focus was concentrated on activities generally labeled and often devalued as service, that so much that I chose to break out service and describe the various types that were focal points for me, and then to begin to relate that back to the work that I might be doing that could be characterized as teaching and learning or research and creative activity. Much of my work, energy, and interest focused on the internal dynamics of the campus, right? The formal and informal capacity building work needed to support a healthy, robust, and vibrant community academic engagement ecosystem. Hence, for me, service to the campus really was the anchor point for me, followed by work that was touching either undergraduate and graduate students directly or indirectly, and with community, really with an intersection point with faculty, very, very central to my work. There was also the work within that could be characterized as service, work that I was doing to the field or profession, either serving on committees or even some of the research and scholarship that I had been involved in. On this slide, you can see a full rendering of one of my maps completed while I was Director of Faculty Development. This rendering brings all the pieces of CIM together. Looking at my map, you can see that it outlines my core public purposes, as well as a couple of examples of how my work is informed by my values. You'll note that my map doesn't list everything I do to bring my values and public purposes to life. Rather, I try to articulate what's at the heart of what I do. One thing you may note about the patterns in my map is that my focus is very much on campus transformation. One thing that I discovered was that my map aligns well with what Wirtz and Sandman called an internal engagement advocate, one of the roles that they that surfaced in their study of boundary spanning at research universities. I've posted the citation for their piece on the references page in case you're interested in reading more about it. But being able to make this connection was really helpful for me, as I had so long felt betwixt and between, not fitting neatly into either a traditional faculty nor a traditional staff role, not a highly grassroots or public-facing community engagement role either. So it was important for me to claim some agency in this space. Before we move on, I just want to make a couple of final points to help you as you work on your own map. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll notice that this is the 5th version of my map. I point this out because it's just a reminder not to stress about getting this version, your first version, right, or thinking that it needs to be perfect, and reminding you that it's an iterative process. However, if you're really wanting to kind of document change over time in this process, I would go ahead and date and mark versions of your maps. In fact, I've saved various iterations of my map so I can look at how my thinking has changed and evolved over time. I encourage those I coach to do the same. Another point is, while again, you'll see that this very much is based upon a template, each of our maps is unique to us. Feel free to diverge from the template, make it your own. Remember, your map is both the result of a reflective process and an artifact that can be further examined and elaborated upon. You can choose to see this as the end of a journey, i.e. you've done the map once, or the beginning of a much longer one. The choice is yours. Now let's look at some ways you can use your SIM. There are several ways you can use your identity map to continue your meaning making and wayfinding. First, you could draft a paragraph or two for use in personal statements, grant applications, leadership teaching, engagement philosophy, or impact statements. Second, you can develop talking points based on your map for use with peers, students, administrators, funders, community members. Test it out with friends and colleagues even. This practice can help you get comfortable presenting your boundary spanning self to others. And it can also help you iterate on your statements to be relatable to different audiences. Another approach in this regard is to do SIM as part of a group activity. This is one of the ways that I brought SIM into classrooms working with undergraduate and graduate students, and also into peer mentoring circles with faculty and staff. Third, you can use your map to develop some short, middle, and long-range goals centered on your public purposes, or even degrees of integration that you'd like to see in your areas of practice or within your roles. Think strategy in that space. Fourth, you can use your map to create a draft action plan and discuss it with peers and mentors. Think more at the tactical level here. If you want to hear how others have used SIM or would like to learn more about the activity, check out the links on this page. I just want to thank you again for making time to invest in your own growth and development. And if you'd like to follow up, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You're welcome to download these materials and save and use them in your personal and academic work. We only ask that you please reference and cite materials appropriately. A sample reference is provided for you on the screen. It's time to wrap up, and to help us do that, I'm going to pass it off to Nicole. Take it away, Nicole.
Thanks, Mary. I think this reflective exercise is the perfect way for Credential Program participants to get started in our program. If you haven't registered for a course yet, the next step would be to check out our website for the next cohort start date and get registered. This will add you to the next cohort of participants, and you will begin receiving emails about next steps. I encourage you to save your notes from the orientation activities, as they will be part of the first cohort meeting. If you've already registered for a course, that's great. I look forward to seeing you at the first cohort meeting, where you'll share your reflections from the orientation activities. If you have questions about the CEP Credential program, course content, or administrative or technical issues, please reach out to me. My contact information is on the screen. Thanks again for joining us for this program orientation. I hope you found it useful. I hope to see you in an upcoming cohort meeting as you get started in one of our credential courses. Take care.